Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting ZBrush Masters. This one's going to be another pretty awesome one. This is what I'm going to love about this one for you all is you're going to see some unique things that you have not seen before 100% with Thomas, especially the topic that he is going to be discussing today. Some of you might know him from all of his jewelry work, which is just super detailed, amazing, focused work. He is definitely going to be discussing things like that, but he's also going to be discussing a whole lot of other things with you guys today, i.e. talking about being a freelance artist, and specifically, he's going to be talking about how he works with one of his clients right now with a clothing line, which is also doing more than just jewelry pieces. So I think this is going to be really awesome for you all. So Thomas, I want to thank you for joining us in another ZBrush Masters. This is the start of season 3. So Thomas is kicking us off. So Thomas, thanks for coming in here with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It's always a joy.
I really love the whiteboard. Let's just get it out of the way. I love what you do with the whiteboards, changing up your background.
You got to keep it busy, right?
Right. I love it. Well, you know what? I should probably put that in my life. You can change up your background. It's like changing wallpaper every day for yourself, right?
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. Keep your streams busy. You get that.
Yeah. So everybody that has never joined us before is Thomas is amazing ZBrush artist that'll be walking you guys through some amazing work. I will be on the other side. For those that know, this is Paul Gabriel with Pixologic. I'll be monitoring the chat and answering as many questions as I can for you through text form. But as we go along here, you can feel free to ask questions of Thomas, and I'll be trying to funnel what I can to him. Please also keep in mind some of the questions you might be asking could be shown later on in his demonstration. So that might be a reason why I'm not asking him the question, because he's going to answer it later on in his stream. And I'll do my best in text form to let you know, hey, he'll be answering this later, and just stay tuned. And then, like I said, we like to let him get in a little groove with you guys, gets going, and then I'll start firing questions at him.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So enough of me talking. Thomas, I'm going to hand it over to you now, and I'll be just the guy in the back.
Sounds good. And feel free to yell whenever you need to.
Yep. So, ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Wittelsbach.
Hello, hello. So first thing I want to say, I know that this is all jewelry, but a lot of the techniques that I've done and developed are really not necessarily jewelry specific, but more how to make objects that are high detailed and then in turn are ready for print and manufacturing. So a lot of these techniques are very usable for figurines and for miniatures and for furniture, you name it. If you're going into printing and manufacturing, a lot of these techniques are actually very applicable. I know a lot of people see jewelry and they're like, oh, I don't do jewelry, and then they go on. But there's a lot of stuff going on that really is just about mesh management and being able to develop models that you can print. And so this is a line that I've been developing with a gentleman called Edward Walker. He has a company called Marveaux, which is a fashion company. He does a lot of really interesting work, and he's in some really beautiful boutiques. And he contacted me about doing zipper pulls for jackets like this. And you can see that they're custom buttons. And this all really started out as, let's make some zipper pulls. So let's turn everybody else off here for a second. Go to zipper pulls and frame a zipper pull. This is sort of where we started. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, we're going to discuss some of the stuff about iteration and working with someone as we go along. And then I'll cut away, do some techniques, and then we'll discuss, once again, iteration. So when you're doing freelance, we're doing this sweat equity. So I'm doing the work, and then he's manufacturing and design, or manufacturing, applying them to the fashion, and then selling it, obviously. And so instead of paying me up front for my money, we're doing it where we're breaking it up. I do the work, he does that, and I get cuts in the company, so it's a longer term pay schedule. But you need to be careful about doing sweat equity because it's pretty easy to get hosed. And as we go along, we'll kind of discuss some of that as well. So we started out with a zipper and a concept of a French Gothic feel. And so we started off and was playing with some zipper forms. And then we kind of went into this like French Gothic, and you can see that, and this is what I mean by iteration. You get some rough shapes down, and then just different textures, different shapes, different forms, different sizes. And when we got to here, we decided that the floor was used a lot in other fashion companies. So we were like, okay, well, let's look at trying to incorporate a cross as opposed to the floors. And so we started experimenting with some crosses. And then I developed that into a form. And I'm going to turn this on just to give you guys an idea. Let's turn line on. Nope, just line. Boop. And so as you start getting your basic shape down, you now have to start deciding with the person you're collaborating with, what are the forms and shapes that we like. And you can see that I grabbed one of these edges and kind of took it up and just playing with little silhouettes. And in here you can see, okay, we kind of agreed on this, but now does it go under? Does it come out and under? See, this one closes here, this one goes open, this one's open and kind of goes over, this one's open and kind of comes under. So this is the kind of iterative stuff that it takes to develop a line. And even if you're developing a line for yourself, almost never will you design a piece and that's it. And if it is, you're probably not working through your designs because you print it out, you wear it, you look at it, you feel it, you change it, you wear it, you look. It's this process of having a printer and your model, and you just keep going back and forth until you find it and see it. And you can tell what detail shows up through the printing, what's not working. So having a printer for development is really important. And you can see here, we dropped the fin or the architectural shape behind the cross. And we decided this is the cross we're running with. So now we do the same thing. We're iterating through some of the shapes and forms. And then we finally settle on this. And as you can see, this is longer because, well, this I did for the wrong zipper. This is a different zipper function, so we wound up having to stretch it out. During this process, we were like, well, wait a minute, let's do some button caps too. And you can see we pulled the cross that we developed earlier and once again start iterating and seeing how we can get it. And then we hit on the idea of rose windows, right? And this is the rose window from Notre Dame and buttons that were based on it. So we kind of came to buttons with rose windows. We played a little bit with buckles. And then we kind of came to, we liked this button, this cross, and we hadn't quite decided on buckles yet. So we then switched to curb links. We had a foundation in the crosses and the buttons, and now we need to come up with something that's wearable. So I did a bunch of base shape curb links, and then I just started to decorate them. You can see floors, and then it's always good when you're iterating to kind of go beyond where you think you're going to go and see what you see. And through a number of different printings, holdings, printings, we kind of went back to that rose window process. Let's turn rose windows on. And he liked the idea of having hollow curbs and then having them be rose window based. So you can see we started here. And through printing, I decided that this is too small. It just didn't carry in the design process. So I worked through a simpler pattern, right? We got a simpler window pattern. And then that eventually evolved into this nice open link that has no cutbacks back here. So this can be printed and cast rather easy because it has no undercuts. And you can see that with a little development, we came up with something that worked. And you can see I left this solid, made it hollow up here so it's a good pour through. You're always having to think about your casting process or your manufacturing process in here. Then we went to other chains and accessories. So we kind of stopped here. This is kind of where we wanted to go. So now we're kind of coming in and saying, all right, now we have chains and accessories. So we did a bunch of different iterations on chain links. just playing around with stuff. You can see this is sort of the base of the center cross. This is another little cross. And we came up with, this is the zipper. So I just took the zipper and made holes in it. I took the little square cross, made bigger holes in it, and we picked these two links. And you can see how we can iterate through these to create, these are wallet chains, but these could also be used as bracelets and wallet chains. And I wanted to come up with a clasp. And so now we're going to jump over and look at a little bit of clasp development. And I believe that is you. All right. So we started once again with kind of this French floor clasp, and it sucked. It was going nowhere. So I wound up finding, this is a spire. Let's revolve it and look at it this way. This is a spire from Notre Dame. And so now it was like, okay, so turning it into a clasp. So I develop, or I use what I call cutters, and it's basically I set up the airspace that needs to be cut. And that way, when I take a base part, I can just sculpt on it, and I don't worry about the mechanism working, because right here, this is the mechanism. These are the holes cut for the springs. It's the pin going through the center, right? And you can see there, it's the little lip that keeps them together and the other spring notch. So this way, I know that my mechanism always works. So I build these, what I call cutters, so I can sculpt free without having to wrap my head around the mechanical functions after I've developed the mechanical functions. So you can see that this produces these and the pins. So we then went to the cathedral chain link, and I wanted to see if I could develop a chain link instead of having a big closure on the links, see if we could develop a like a hidden closure within the link so it looks seamless. And I did that by coming up with this cutter. And you can see this is one part, and I have this hollow in this cutter. So when you Boolean this out, it actually generates this as the pin that's the plug. Use this, you cut a hole in it in one side, and then you Boolean intersect it here. So it gives you the pin that's going in, it gives you the hole that's going in, and it's created this part. See, the plate cuts it in half, and it gives you the dimple and the nipple all in one cut. You see it has the underside there and there. So you just lay these out, and they cut the part into pieces, and they give you your intersections. So on the other ones as well, you can see this is your base shape. This is the cutter for the outside and the inside. And sliding these into this, you get these parts, right? And that is a little dent for the spring on the back. You see there's a little dent for the spring, the pin, and the clasp closure. So you can see how, if you do a little pre-work, am I on the back? Did I lose you guys? Oh, there they are. Wrong side. If you do a little work on the mechanism first, you can just come in and you're free to sculpt, and then you just move your design around to make sure that the closures work. These are, once again, sort of hidden closures for the different links. You can see that this slides in here. There's the pin that pinches it. So this is a cold intersection, right? There's no soldering. There's no welding. You just take that pin, and especially in silver and gold, you hammer that in. It's a little bit bigger at a wedge, and it'll just pinch in there, and that's never coming out. So we were playing with these. He also had this idea for a little lock, and I knew that we were going to sculpt on it. So you can see that's the square, that's the arm. This is the closure, right? And you can see the different parts. And then that produces this trench, that, the pin, the cut, and the shaft for this. And this was very simple. Once again, trying to develop things that don't need a lot of soldering, don't need a lot of finishing, make manufacturing a little easier. We have this guy, this just drops in there. You can see a little dimple there. You just pop a spring in, set it, and then get an all, tap that, it spreads, and now, once again, you have a cold fusion closure. So with a little work, you can start to develop the mechanisms, hinges, clasps, anything. Like for toys, you can do the joints and the elbow joints. And once you have all your closures, you just sculpt, slide them into where they need to be, Boolean, and you have it all done, and you know the geometry works. So we then jumped into here, we developed a few of these closures, right? And you can see this is the sculpt. You can see I changed this here because if that's going to open, this needs to rock on that angle. So we changed the design a little, and then we started to do some more chains. We were looking at some pearls maybe. These are just some simple chains, bigger and smaller, and you can see that now we have the closures for these. We looked at doing something like this with a box clasp, and at this point, we then went to, no, that's the closures, sorry. We then went back to the rose window stuff, and I started generating just a bunch of rose windows. And let's look at these real quick. Started generating a bunch of rose window shapes so we could choose which ones read best. So we printed everything, and that way you can see at 15 millimeters, you know, this is just too small at 15 millimeters. It doesn't look like a rose window. It just looks like a dimpling nickel, you know. But it's always good to know because sometimes things show up that you never believe. You have to print because you think you know what's going to happen. And then when you see the print, you're like, oh, well, that works or that doesn't work. That printing interface for manufacturing is incredibly important. I print almost every piece like 3 to 5 times, and I wear it around. I wear it. Is there something pokey that you don't notice? You know, it's really important to have it in your hands because you can start to analyze what's coming out. Can I print at 50 microns? Can I print at 25 microns? You know, it allows you to analyze your process in flow, and I think that's really important. And then these are the ones we chose, and they looked good. And
so quick question before you keep moving on here.
Of course.
Number one, how much RAM are you using? Is it 24 gigs? I can't read the small numbers.
Up here?
Yeah, how much RAM do you have on your computer?
I have, this one has 64, I think.
64.
Or is it 36? I think it's 36. This is the Wacom Pro engine. And I don't really remember. I think it's 36 because it's more than 16. But I thought it was 64.
The active memory will tell you how much memory you're using inside of ZBrush. And the free memory will say how much is still available in the system.
Free memory is 18.6. Active memory is 6,174.
Okay, so 24 gigs. So you probably have 32 gigs or something like that because your operating system uses RAM and everything as well.
Yeah. Okay, so 32.
Probably. Something like that. Probably 32.
Yeah.
And then your iterations that you've been doing and showing, how much time have you been getting between iterations? Is it...
It depends on the part. I mean, obviously the clasps took a little longer because I literally had to move things around and, you know, make sure it worked. These went very quickly. And I'm going to show you how we iterated these, but because I just looked at some things, and this is obviously radial symmetry. So, you know, you're only sculpting one of these. So these went very fast. I mean, I did a bunch of these in an afternoon. We printed them, changed them, printed them, changed them, printed them, and then chose the ones we like. I cleaned them up and then reprinted them. And that was maybe 2 days. And not
you
full.
Did all these that we're looking at right now in 2 days?
Yeah.
And that's including printing them to look at them as well?
Yes, including printing them to look at them. Because I print these at 50 microns. Because I'm not worried about the surface detail. I just want to see the holes. You know what I mean? And if the holes show up at that 50 microns, then I know that when I manufacture print them at 25, it'll be better, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Of course. And so we knew that we now needed rings, and I started to develop some rings. And once again, we're keeping some of that rose window stuff, right? And you can see how incorporating the rose windows in different styles, having a different piece behind it so it can change the texture behind it very quickly and easily. Same here. You can actually, this one belongs to that, I think. And then since it was French Gothic, we sort of did some Napoleon stuff. And then those are a couple different iterations of the Napoleons. Now the other thing, hold on, let's tap that, bring that here, is while you're doing the top, you're also iterating the sides and styles. And with get metal prices, this allows me to analyze the price. So if I don't hollow this out, it would cost more. If I hollow this out, we're using less metal. So for gold, it's much better to do something like this because it's dramatically more expensive. And then you can see here, we switch to, this is actually the pattern on the front of Napoleon's throne. And you can see working through the bottoms and just trying to come up with the form we like. And so let me hop to this and I'll show you kind of how we, oh, hold on. I'll just quickly show you these. These are the other style of ring. And you notice these have rounds. He was looking at trying to leave some of these open so we didn't necessarily have to produce every size, but where you could squish or pinch or spread to like a good couple sizes. So each size could cover the half sizes for maybe 2 sizes or 3 sizes. You could get 3 to, and depending on how far you stretch it out, obviously you get it more. But you have to remember that if you're doing rings that, like my stuff really isn't sizable because I put texture everywhere. Most places will give you rings that have a plain bottom, and then that way they can cut it and size it either up or down. I never do that. Which means you have to have like 32 molds to get all the sizes done in these. Come on. Boop. There. So because of the architectural stuff and because of the portrait stuff, I jumped into how do we develop this stuff. And let's go with the flat stuff first. So basically I start with just a square or a rectangle that has some thickness, right? I'll mask off the back. And, you know, let's just, the current brush, what? Oh. That's the history brush, that's why. So, you know, you can see that you could develop, you know, rose windows fairly easy. And so we do that. I will tend to mask all this out. Now, obviously, when I was doing this, I was making these a little. What happened? Turn symmetry off. Get up here. Give it a little more thickness real quick. And so I have my form here, and I would just bring it in down here. Is that the right one? No. That's the right one. Use your folders. Folders are incredible tools that you can ask Paul. We asked for a couple of times throughout this whole process, and they're awesome. The other thing is I almost always Boolean within my folders as opposed to using the live Boolean outside, only for management, because if you're using your live Boolean, it dumps out a new tool up here. So for control, I like to do it through Boolean folder, and then it dumps the product out in the same subtool. So you can keep all of your Booleans in line. So if you're doing a Boolean, then you're punching a hole and then doing this. You do your Boolean process, and then it gives you that object. And then you have your next Boolean process set up, and you just take that, copy it, put it here. That one's next, copy it, put it there. It allows you to keep the order of your Booleans in place, and you can keep the results of the Booleans in line in process, and it just keeps your Booleans so much cleaner without having 100 tools. You wind up with subtools you can stack up pretty easily. And so you can see we have this guy, we have this guy, we have this guy. And now all I do is push start, turn it on, and you can turn live Boolean on. You can come in here, move it around so it is the thickness that you want it, and you want it to get exactly where you want it. Right, see with that, we'll knock it down a little. And there we go. We Boolean it, and we wind up with this part. And now what's really nice about the new Gizmo and the Gizmo tools is you just come in here, you go bend dark, you drag it down to where it's the distance you want it. We wanted a little more room there. And you're like, oh, well, it's all distorted. Well, you just change the radius until it's where you want it, right? And there you go. And now you have a ring that's the thickness and it's round. You can then go back and size it appropriately. But it's a super fast way of developing flat objects that you want to bend, right? So this is a really good, efficient way to do things flat. Like with the radial symmetry, it's a lot easier doing it flat on a good high resolution mesh than trying to get it on a half round and you're like, it's a nightmare. So speaking of that, we'll hop over to Napoleon. Napoleon frame. And so obviously the other one has a lot more details, but I wanted to go over a couple things here, and it was just probably easier to keep it simple. So here's Napoleon on a disc. So whenever I'm doing portraits or let's say those roses on the sides of the rings and anything that's going to be bas-relief or pseudo-bas-relief, I'll sculpt the full thing. So here is the sculpture in Napoleon that I did for this part, right? I sculpted him in full round, got him to where I want him to be, and then let's turn this guy on, you know, and what I'll do is hit Gizmo.
Hey, Thomas, before you go into that, there's a couple people saying your audio is pretty low. Can you up your audio volume in the OBS to see if you're just audio?
Sure.
So just bump up your slider for your microphone in OBS.
Is that better?
We'll see. Go ahead and minimize that. If everyone can know if that's better. Yeah, they're saying that's better.
Okay, sorry about that. Here, I can also pull this a little closer. Because I look down. It always sounds good when I'm looking at you, but then I look down, I'm like, eh. All right, so I'll do the full sculpt of him, and then I'll rotate him around to the view we want, right? Do we want a profile? Do we want the profile where you just get the eye? That's another very classic bas-relief situation where you get just the touch of the eye. Doing to be a little more presentational, you know, and you get them, you just rotate them, and then you come to the side. Hold on, let's hide that. Come to the side and reset to front and just squish them. And so now you have true, you know, you're not guessing what's going on, but you notice it's a little flat. So normally what I do is I do it in about 3 stages. I'll come in here and I will mask off some depth, right? Like the back here doesn't need to be very thick. Let's go to ClayTubes and turn on mask. Change my brush size back down to 2. Come in, mask them off, clean that up, find just a nice line there. The back's there, that's good. And I'll flip it. Sorry, I can't type, I always have to look at my darn keyboard. And I'll flatten that back side out a little more, flip it around, and I'll actually make the front side a little fatter. And then come in and find a point around the face. Yeah. No. Let's get that. Stop it. There we go. And now come back in, W, and I'll puff that out a little more. And now you'll notice there's a pretty deep spike there. Oops. This is where you take it and you can just kind of pull this back down a little so it's not so melodramatic. And now you have more dimensionality in your sculpt. Obviously you're going I wonder what that was. So now you have this, you're going to come back in and, you know, just clean these seams up a little. And then I'll normally come back and just, you know, reiterate. No, that's not happening. It's that. Come back in and just touch these lines up a little. Smooth it, throw that back on, right? And so now you have a pretty good base for a bas relief. You can come back in and touch up, you know, your eyes, and I'll usually tune it up some, you know, sharpen it. And there we go. So now we have this thing that has all these undercuts. This is pretty useless, right? So what we can do, we come over from draft, we set our angle to 2, and we go from draft. This is poly paint from draft, and draft is a draft angle. So we're saying 2 angles or 2 degrees. So we're bringing it out just a little from the visual line, right? And so we go from draft. Boop. There we go. And you can see the red. And now everywhere there's red, that's an undercut. Okay. So I have this right here from poly paint, and that means make poly groups from poly paint. So I'm going to turn that paint into poly groups. And let's turn on poly group and make sure it's there. It is. And now I'm going to tap on this. Tap on that. There we go. Flip it. And now, once again, W, I'm going to come back down here to where the flat back is, right? So that's the lowest point. And I'm just going to drag all of this back and down. And I'm going to just give it a little bit of a push, right? So we're actually getting a draft. Now this is someplace where you'll often have to do it in both directions a little, kind of get that, kind of get that. And you'll also notice that because the draft is at 2 degrees, you wind up with some of these cracks here, right? So sometimes, depending on how bad these lines are and the resolution of your model, you may want to change that draft to 0 first. Or you can also, your first step can also be, let's get back here, because you can see that the draft angle is taking it past the visual sight line. So another thing you can do is before you do the draft angle, fill object, Control W, is group front. And it does almost the same thing as just happened, except it doesn't. Group front? Are those different colors? Okay, there they are. Now you see how these aren't colored now because the draft angle isn't applied. Now why didn't that? Okay. And so now we come back here again to the lowest point. We drag. Drag all this back, right? We go to the center, we make it a little bigger, And now you can run your draft angle from draft. And this will give you, this is a little less smaller holes there. And you can see you still have to come back and poke with it a little. But I'll tell you what, when you're trying to figure out draft angles on a part, this is super easy to come back in and just, you can see that in all reality, that's a very minimal draft. So this is something, at this point, I would Dynamesh and then reproject up to this model, and that'll get rid of all the noise. And once you're there, we come back to this guy, right? And we have dealt with him, everything's straight. And then when we put him on here, you can see that I masked that off and I gave him like a little half round to kind of punch some of the depths on this. And so that way you can do bas relief very quick. And I have a Napoleon sculpture that I can use for other things. So like when I was doing the scooters for 1000s toys, I sculpted a real Vespa and then I squished it and changed it to make it look like it's drawing. And then that way I have a base model that I can use for other models and other things. So I'm always building up libraries of realistic models that I can then torque, turn, and twist. So that's how I get, those are a couple ways of iterating and developing some dimensional forms, right? All right, so let's get back in here. Doop, frame. Boom. So at this time, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he found some really, really cool denim. And Edward he's really a materials person. Like he'll find these fantastic stuff, like those coats are made out of tents from Vietnam and all of the liners are 1950s Harley Davidson bandanas. And, you know, there's like this material fetish. So if I'm not mistaken, he found a denim that he actually loved. And we sort of changed the tenor of the designs to be a little bit more like in the 1960s and 70s, the biker clubs sort of had, especially out west, started to have like a lot of the big Navajo jewelry and things like that. So we sort of shifted to 60s, 70s biker Navajo-esque. And so I didn't want to do traditional Navajo jewelry, just in my case, appropriation issues. You know, I didn't want to just knock off traditional Navajo designs. And so I worked on getting them a little bit modernized and using forms. You can see that, let's get these to the side here. Trying to come up with a repetitive theme, you know, something, you know, the arrows, the interweaving, but this is a lot more dimensional, a little bit different than traditional Navajo. And the other thing I wanted to do, we were doing silver, but we were also doing silver and titanium. So we were getting a different color mixture from the stuff. And I'll show you some of that stuff in just a second here. And so our rings were turquoise, coral, silver, and then silver and titanium. And then these were just a little bit more, some of that like coupe and, you know, that biker stuff. These are just a couple of iterations of trying. Now let me show you. So we kind of started here. And once again, me not using very good keyshot material. Oops. Well, there's that. And so I did some very fast renderings on a lot of the stuff. So we had stuff to look at. And so you could start to conceive the color. Come on, right? You know, give you some ideas of the look. Here's some of these. Come on, right? And these are just really fast renderings to kind of get an idea of what color-wise, colorways, you know, are we doing this? Is it all to, you know? And these are going out. I'm sending these images with the models. So he has some color stuff in his head as well. And then just so you can see, this is one we produced. it's not sulfured yet, so this is bright silver, but it doesn't have the dark in it. But you can see this is the black titanium, turquoise, and sterling. And you can see it's reminiscent of that Navajo stuff, but with the altered metals and some of the design stuff. Oh, these are the titanium and gold, some of the earlier chains. But we can go over some of that if you want to see it. But this goes out with the models, so we have color concepts as well. Now, boop, boop. So we went from rings to other accoutrements, zipper pulls, buckles, eyelets, some bracelets. And none of this stuff was necessarily fully developed. This is all just throw stuff out there, see what happens. Throw stuff out there, see what happens. Because we didn't have a full vocabulary for this stuff established yet. And you can see you just toss it out, toss it out. Boom, boom, boom. And so then we hop back to buttons, because buttons are very important since it's fashion. These go on the jeans, these go on the coats. So we really started to develop a button in this style that we could use. And here's another place I want to show you some iteration tools that are incredibly powerful now. And you can see that we were tossing different shapes around. We were tossing different patterns around. And the easiest way to get this going, and so you can work through it, let's go here. Frame. So we had the base shape of the button. And then I developed just a bunch of textures, right? This is a background texture. This is a background texture. This is one of the architectural shapes. This is the other architectural shape we kind of decided on. And then there are just these background things. And right, so I was just playing through some of these. So what's wonderful about this is if we go back up here to our, and that is, that's a Boolean cut to just make sure the outside edges are sharp and clean. Because I'm sure everyone knows, you know, when you start smoothing and stuff, those inside creases start to, you know, blend together. This way, I have a part that's sharp, you know, that's a good, clean, sharp cut. So we have our button shape. And then I'm going to pick an architectural element. And this allows you to come in, and I'm going to hold down Control and tap this. So this is my history state. I'm going to bring this architectural element in to this guy. I'm going to turn that off. Go to our history brush. All right, we got to change that to 5.5. No. We're not crashing, all right? Don't crash. Any questions while we're waiting for this to decide if it's going to die?
I've been getting them. I'm just answering the Keyshot questions right now. So again, someone's asking me about purchasing Keyshot.
Oh yeah.
There's really not the big difference between Keyshot HD and Keyshot Pro. Obviously, is Pro is going to have a lot more controls in it, a lot more things that you can do, advanced features. So if you're not sure, I'd recommend then just getting Keyshot HD with the bridge. You're going to need the bridge, and you can upgrade. So there's a small fee also to upgrade, so you can do that as well, and you're not really out too much. I'll get you the upgrade pricing and share a link with you as well, so you can see the updated pricing.
Isn't there something to do with output size as well? Like you can only get
not in the versions, not in the regular HD, yes, but not in the special edition one that's made for ZBrush users. Either one, regular Keyshot HD, yes, does have an output restriction over Pro of the size that you can make of the image, the final image, yes. There's many other advanced features now that you can't use in HD. There's a comparison sheet. I'll get that and put in the link for everybody. But if you're just starting out, you're not sure, I would say go with at least Keyshot HD with the bridge, and then you can upgrade to Keyshot Pro if you want to at any point in time. If you find there's features you want to use in Keyshot that you're not getting in the HD version. I will find the information about the upgrading prices for you as well.
So you can see that you could just pop on a shape. Okay. So you can see you just pop on a shape. And now I'm going to bring this shape in. I want this one to come in. And all I do is hold down Control, tap it to where that little white bit comes on. Go back to my base shape. Nope. Go back to my base shape. And you can see that it just draws it up. And it's blending those forms. Now you notice that I just kind of wiped that out a little. That's okay, because we're going to have a little bit of overage when we're first getting our base shapes in. But as far as being able to compile a bunch of different forms and shapes, this with the history brush is just absolutely awesome. And it also allows you to use it sort of as a eraser, and we'll get to that in a bit. So, hold on. So we have that. And now that I know that that's all there, all my little points and stuff are clean. All my edges are where I want them to be. I just go back to this guy. Is that the one? Oh. That's the one. Hold down Control, turn it off, turn it on. Come back to here. Make your brush a little smaller. And you just, maybe that's a little too small. Right? And you can get it to blend however you want. Now, History Brush does not work with symmetry, so you do have to come in and just do it by hand. But that's okay, because you're actually saving a ton of time. If you've ever iterated things, it's pretty awesome. And so now we have these two elements joined together, and it's like, okay, well, I want this in here. Hold down Control, turn it on, turn it off, and now come back to our little guy in here. And now I'm just going to come in and add this. And so you can see how this becomes really helpful if you have, where you don't want to mess up the rest of your model. This is a very simple and really effective way of getting multiple patterns in, multiple designs in. I use it a lot. I'm a big history brush fan. It's a very big part of my workflow. We come in, and we attach it. And let's say we've had this design. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, yes. Make sure to mask your backs, because you don't always want back face masking on with this brush. So make sure to mask the back or use back face masking. Now, the other really cool thing about this is, well, we like that texture, but we like this one too. So we're going to hold down Control, tap it on, tap it off, come back to our guy here. And we're going to look at it here. And, you're doing this and you send images or the models off to your designer. I would send images off to your designer. If you don't trust your designer impeccably, do not send them models, because if you send them models, you have no bargaining chips if they decide to not pay you. So there are some really Adobe PDF used to be able to install OBJs, and you could look around it, you can move it around, but it's an unusable file as far as production. If you're doing freelance, don't necessarily get in the habit of giving all of your work to them. Send them images, send them, movies, send them something they can look around. But be careful about sending people your models, because the second you don't have your model, you have no power. So let's say they like both of these. The nice thing about this is pressure sensitive. So you can come back in, get it nice and hard here, and then just slowly fade your detail in. So this is a good way of being able to generate a number of different textures with many different options. Come in, futz with it, and get your options down. It's a lot of fun, and it's really cool. So this is how I tended to develop the buttons quickly, because if we knew that we like this shape, we like this shape, we like the spirals, we like that scoopy outside edge, this way you can iterate, 5 of these with different textures. You can do these in different textures, and then you just brush them into a number of things, as opposed to having to join them and decimate them and rebrush or Z-remesh and redecimate and project. And so, because I don't particularly like to work in Dynamesh, I would far rather have a quad mesh that has my subdivision levels in it, because it allows me to clean up. It allows me to move things without destroying the work that I've already done on the model. We'll get to that too. I'll show you some of that.
Can you show a couple more of how you're just using that history brush to make sure they understand exactly what you're doing here?
Yeah, of course. And so let's go to this guy, right? So we want the outside edges to be this, and we like this pattern. So I'm going to come back to here. Oops, sorry. Come here, hold down Control, tap it, and tap it back on. See how there's a white block in there? Now everything that I've touched will still have that white block. So when you switch subtools, you need to just tap it and tap it again, so it actually registers that as the history state. The real cool thing about history is it doesn't have to be even in the same subtool. Like if I have these over in a completely different tool and I only have the button that I'm working on here, I can do the same thing. Just hop over to the other subtool, pick which subtool I'm working on, and then it'll apply it to something in the other tool. Does that make sense? So here let's do this. Append. Delete that. So let's say I don't want all that stuff in. I know that I want to keep what I'm working on, or it's already on something I'm working on. Well, all you have to do is develop a subtool with all your different options, go back, click that, come back in here, and now you see it has, now I've masked this off right now, so it doesn't go in, and I'm doing that intentionally. But you can see that even from the other subtool, or from the other tool, you still can history state to it. So let's say you have a couple iterations of a figure, or one in a pose, or before you start sculpting on it, if you just save it to another tool and then mark it, that can be your history state. You can also go farther back in the history state of the subtool you're working on, and use it there. And I have a demo that will kind of show some of that. Right? And so that allows you to pull that in if you're like, oh, well, I really want to see it in here. You see it in here. And like on this, I would tend to just go over it a little, come back. Well, you can just come back to the earlier state of this brush, turn Control, come back to here. And now we can bring this edge back in. We can bring that edge back in. Like if you're getting dimp, just smooth it. And so you can see you can almost use it as like an eraser tool, right? And you know, you can go back and forth and get it exactly to where you want it. The thing about history tool that I would say that you need to remember is that it's very directional. It is a projection tool. It's not a morph tool. So let's say I'm doing this and I have a steep angle. I'm like, oh, there's just a little spot right there. And I do that. We'll see how this is all pulled and distorted now. So you have to make sure that you go, oh, I changed my history state. That's okay. We'll just do it from there. Right, I want this part here. As you can see, it pulled all this up. So if you do that, you don't have to stress about it, just smooth it. But remember that the history tool is a projection tool, not a morph tool. So you kind of have to take it, smooth it where the pinch is, lower the res so we can get that out. And see, that's another, right there, that's another reason I like to work in multiple subdivisions, because it allows me to have real control over my mesh. If this is just a high dynamesh, you can't, you know, every time people are like, well, Tomas, you sculpt in high resolution. How do you ever smooth things? How do you get bumps out of things? Well, if you have your subdivision levels the whole time, that's never a problem. Getting surfaces smooth again and things is very easy if you retain a good subdivision count. And so I did this, but I'll tend to rock it and make sure that I get it from a bunch of different angles, so I don't get any of that weird pulling. Does that make sense? What do you think? All right.
Yes.
Okay.
That makes start. Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just typing away, so I don't want to hear people to hear my typing. So I have to
okay. So here we are. We developed some of the buttons, and we basically came up with, come on, frame. You have to tap it before you start twisting it. We basically came up with this that we then could set either turquoise or coral in, right? So that is the button that we wound up with. And we shifted, we liked the wallet chains, right? But we changed the design right from cathedral to sort of that Navajo, you know, triangle, repetitive triangle patterns, and then some of the other little designs, right? And you can see they're not really Navajo patterns, but it has that flavor. Excuse me. Drink water. And so redeveloped the pattern. It also now has the place where the stone sits, and then some that are simpler, smaller, and then the different options. This is just this one sideways, so there can be stones from all directions. This has the jump link that doesn't have, right, the side isn't presented. This way the side presents itself very well. And we have our sort of American Indian thingy. We then did, was it pear blossom? I always forget what kind of blossom. And this is sort of that traditional pear blossom, I think. These are a blossom. I can never remember. And so you just make the things, and then you just work through the different patterns, right? These can't go all the way down, so you develop a different link, and you just try to figure out the links you need to accomplish the curves and the angles you want. Now these, he also found some silver or some beads that were made out of buffalo nickels, and to see how they sit on the body, because they were pretty big, I just threw them on a figure so you can sort of see the silhouettes that happen with things in scale, right? And I just measured my neck as the base, and, you know, often just laying them out, looking at them, and you can get an idea of what's going on as far as how it's going to sit on the body. So then, once again, I think it was a fabric issue. We sort of changed again, and we went towards similar, not too big a jump, but we then went to sort of more of a trippy 60s denim instead of biker 60s denim. And we went with the smiley face, the butterfly, the mushroom, and the peace sign. And then these were carryovers from what I was doing with the Navajo stuff, but these are sort of that geometric, sort of psychedelic-y pattern. So I brought those in to look at so we could start to see this sort of necklace and charm bracelet thing that we go in. So we started development on this. That mushroom isn't the one that wound up. You can see here, tab, there we go. And you can see here, this is the Navajo, right? And I didn't change this much. And all I did was put little spiralies in this and hollow out that arrow. And then you can see that's the smiley face in the context. And then that's the mushroom with the swirls behind it in the context. We worked on some bracelets in this format, right? And I just made, he was like, I like this shape of bracelet. So I started kind of with that shape of bracelet and just started to throw a bunch of stuff out there. See, those are the blossoms. These are just the triangles, butterflies. These were sort of little mushroom fields, sort of like the Navajo that has that wheeled in texture. And we kind of, he liked the ones from the Navajo stuff as well. And then one of these. And so you can see, once again, you just start generating models. And it really happens a lot more when you're working with someone else, because when I'm working with myself, you know, I know pretty quickly that I don't need to follow some of the stuff out. You know, I could just do that area and be like, not really, not what I'm looking for. So when you're working with other people, you often have to fill out a lot of different iterations for them to pick, right? And then it's a back and forth editing process that takes longer than if you're developing work for yourself. Here we have the zipper pull and the buttons. And then these were sort of iterations of rings that were the button and the smiley face. And, you know, you can see that change this, turn this to look like a little perforated paper, and, you know, brought it into that genre of that. And this is where we're standing right now. Right now we're doing some work with, instead of doing casting stuff, we want to do some die stamping. So we're working on some technical stuff at that end right now for some of this. But you can see that, and this isn't everything. I mean, I probably, of just that flaming smiley face, I probably have 8 to 10 different versions of that one as well. I just couldn't find the model. I have pictures, just couldn't find the model when I was trying to compile all this stuff. So when you're dealing with sweat equity, it takes a lot of, you have to be incredibly conscientious of how much time you spend on something. And what I would probably suggest doing is getting an external, you know, like 5 terabyte drive or something, and just doing all your quick saves onto that, and quick save every 30 minutes. And then you just go down the line, you count them, and that's how much time you've spent on the project. And, you know, it's very important for you to be able to wrap your head around what your work's value is, right? I added up the quick saves from this, and if I were working for $70 an hour, which I'll never work for $70 an hour, but that's a common modeling rate. So at $70 an hour, the amount of models quick save, this project's about, it's $68,000 right now of work, right? And the nice thing about quick saves is it only quick saves when you're working. So it's not, you might get an extra couple quick saves in there somewhere around the way. But for the most part, it's a pretty accurate way of assessing long-term projects. And so, it's important to know, oh, well, I have $68,000 of work here, but I only got $10,000 of the company. And so it's very important to understand your value when you're doing things like sweat equity. Edward's been absolutely fantastic. Other companies I've dealt with, the second that you've put in the work, and the work could have taken a year or 2 years or 8 months or 2 weeks, whatever it is, but the second that it shifts to them having to do their work, and they're the people with the money, it's incredible how much their work all of a sudden becomes very important. They're like, well, I'm doing all the work. And it's like, well, you've been studying for 3 years, So you really have to do it with good people because it can become very hectic. But if you're doing something on this large a scale that's this flexible, most people aren't going to pay you $120,000 for development unless it's a real company, And real companies are used to dealing with time processes. That's why you come out with 2 lines a year, because once you have that in, it's a lot of iteration, a lot of printing, a lot of holding in your hands to keep things moving forward. And where the one thing about jewelry that's very different, and why that constant printing within the process is so important, is that it's about wearability as well. And if you wear your ring around and all of a sudden it has sharp little things on the sides and it turns into a cheese grater, well, you know that from printing, and then you can touch it up. You'll see that, oh, well, that detail didn't come out quite that sharp. So how do I define that detail better? And that isn't always cut things deeper. So for jewelry, because you have that other person who is a very big part of the interaction, jewelry is truly interactive art. You're making it for someone to wear. You have to consider that other person. And wearability becomes a big deal, because if you're making jewelry and you have something and it wears horribly, you will never get a second sale. They'll never buy a different design because it sucks to wear. And that's the whole point. It has an end task that it needs to fulfill. So let's go here. So this isn't part of that line, but you can see that it has like a similar detail pattern on the side, but you can see that in all reality, it's actually very flat. There's not a lot here going on that's going to bother the wearability. And so this looks very aggressive, right? It looks like this could be very uncomfortable to wear. But if you'll notice, all the tips point down on this side, right? They're all coming towards the body. And this stuff that could potentially be sharp, I still try to tone all of that down. The other thing that I want to show you here is kind of sculpting in layers as opposed to just drawing your detail on. This is drawn on detail, these hash marks, right? There's no level change. There's no differentiation in angle, form. So this is what I consider drawn on detail. This prints easily. There's not a hard point printing, but it reads flat. And so here, you really want to make sure when you're doing things that go over and under, that they actually go over and under. You get a dimensionality that is real, or you're going to wind up with stuff that doesn't reflect well, right? And so you have to remember, if you're coming out of the program, like your light isn't baked into the materials. You really have to wrap your head around reflectivity. And so, good strong layers. And then I use the drawn on detail to do just that. I want that to be flat and kind of dark. So I'm doing that, and this is going to reflect very dynamically. And when I sulfur this is going to be pretty dark. So now let's jump to a few things here. Since this was used in the graphics for the course, or for the web stream, we'll use it. This has been around for a while. I think this is what I used in the demo in 2016, so it's been around. And I want to discuss just mesh management, because in a lot of these streams, I see a lot of people going to Dynamesh or to a remesh, and they have no subdivision levels. And in turn, you really do not have control over a high poly single mesh model. And a lot of those problems that people have, how can I smooth it? How can I move it? How can I retain the detail? How can I, it all works with subdivision levels. And making it a quad model with subdivision levels is going to give you so much more control of your model at the end of the day. So this first piece is the Dynamesh. And this is a 23 million poly Dynamesh, right? And if we look up here, you can see that with 23 million polys, we can have a lot of very, very subtle surface detail. Now, the other thing, talking about printers, is that, or talking about going to printing, when I talk about detail, I'm talking about this stuff. Like these hash marks here, and not these cuts and creases, but like, see this subtle brush stroking here, these light patterns here. You can see there's a ridge here, and then there's like a little pattern that kind of does that. Like a lot of this very subtle surface detail. So that surface detail is not what most printers are talking about when they say they have good detail, right? Because a lot of times you'll see like a flower ring, and it's like just a wire, and it has a bunch of little wires in it. And they're like, oh, look at the detail we can print. Anybody can print a 0.5 millimeter wire. Anyone. It's not hard. This stuff, this surface detail, is the stuff that's very hard. And that is your XY resolution. So most printers, they'll say, oh, we have 25 microns, but they're talking about their Z axis resolution. And their XY axis resolution winds up being like 150. Well, you're not going to get any of this very subtle stuff with a high resolution XY. And so make sure, if you're talking about doing high resolution, and we're talking about retaining some of this stuff, not these creases, but this real subtle stuff on the surface, that's your XY resolution in your printers. And that's not usually what they're talking about. So make sure you know what you're printing and why. So now how do we retain this print? I can't send a 25 million poly print to a printer. So, oh, that's good, I kept that. The other thing I wanted to show you, and I don't know how many people use this, but a lot of my students don't, or don't know about it. So everybody gets these little pucky things. Let me make sure that it's, okay, it's these little, and they're just weird little suction things, and you'll sit there and you can't get them out because they're like weird little points. I'm sure everyone's had like the one little point up here that they can't get rid of. If on your smooth modifiers, you take your minimum connection points down to 1, then it will affect just 1 point as opposed to needing 3 points to affect it. And you can see that that actually now starts to smooth those little puckery things much better. But here's our second issue. We're at 25 million polys. I'm trying to smooth those puckery things, and you just don't have the it's too much geometry for smooth or smooth stronger to work well. Excuse me. And this is where people run into problems about finishing high resolution models. So I took this and we Z-remeshed it and reprojected it. And you can see that through that remesh and reprojection, we lost a little of our edge fidelity and our surface fidelity. If I had, that's also because I didn't project at 25 million polys. You just have to sit around and wait for it to happen. And I was prepping for this, and I wasn't going to wait 3 hours for that to reproject. So one of the beautiful things we could do come back here. We hold down Control. We tap our model. And now this is our history state. We come back here. And you can see that it's very easy. Turn on history. It's easy to come back. Okay. It's easy to come back and crisp this model up. Right, and you can see that it's sort of sharpening stuff up. And so if you need to come back in and get the surface detail into your high resolution model, this is a good way of doing it. Once again, another nice thing about this is that, let's say I want, come on. Let's say I want to smooth her cheeks out, and in here you can often, it's hard to get rid of those little ridges. And this is stuff that people have a hard issue getting these dents and dimples out of a high resolution mesh. I just lower my resolution. Get it down here to where your mesh is pretty big, and you can come in, get rid of your dents because you're just relaxing your base mesh some. High res. Relax your base. Don't get too heavy. You don't want your cheeks to collapse. Right? And you can see how a lot of those very subtle little dents smooth out when you relax that base mesh. And then you just step your way up. And see, we might want to keep those wrinkles around the eyes. So we just use a different brush. And smooth. High res. There it is. And see, I can keep those and just smooth out this stuff. And you can see that you can very quickly determine, you know, where the dents are, you can get rid of them. And that works for a lot of stuff. Let's say, you know, you want it the shoulder smooth, right? Well, once again, it's there. Does this one have subdivision levels? Yes. Right? Come in. Relax your base mesh. High res. High res. And you can see that you have a ton of control over your geometry. The other really nice thing that you can do with this is that if you go all the way lower, let's hope we have a real low mesh here. Nope, this isn't quite low enough. Let's come back to this. My allergies are killing me. Let's come here. Hide you. So let's say all of a sudden we need this to be fatter. And if you take move, right, if you start to move this around, you can get it distorted pretty easily. Right? And as you move stuff, often you're going to remove your patterns and stuff out of context and they'll start to distort pretty dramatically. What's wonderful about this, and it works with like snakes and textured arms and things like that. Come on, let's. should count how many undos I need to do. All right. So now we come over here, we lower our res. And once again, I tend to use ZModeler as my block up tool, and I want as few polygons in my block up as possible. I try to keep it under 700 polygons. I think 721 is sort of the magic number in some ways, where you can get like 9 subdivision levels and still stay in that 2 to 5 million poly range to start sculpting. And what that does is see, this is still a little big because I Z remeshed this. I didn't start really, really low. But what's nice is you can, at these lower levels, you can come out and let's move some of this stuff over here. And we're going to make this substantially larger. Right? And because ZBrush sort of reprojects every time you make a little puffier. And what I'm trying to do is keep everything as kind of square as possible. And I didn't look at this to see what that spacing was actually like, but you can see that we moved that pretty dramatically out of a loop. And as we come back up in higher resolution, all the way back up, see, we only have 6 subdivision levels there. I prefer to have like 9. But you can see that it retained a ton of that surface. Now, this was the softer surface detail, but it retains a lot of this upper end detail. And you can really have a lot of freedom of moving and shoveling and getting stuff out after you've already sculpted something. And I find that to be an incredibly powerful, powerful tool. Yeah. So subdivision levels are awesome sauce. Oh, and the other thing, hold on. How many of those things did I move? Let's kick it back. So that's one really powerful tool of being able to use your subdivision levels. Here's the other. We have this beautiful detailed model, and now we need to go to print. You're going to take 25 million polys and try to take it to a printer, you're going to kill it. So what do? We decimate. And I found that you can do this any time in your process. If you're kind of not going to work on the model anymore, this is a good way of defining final details, right? So you take your model and you decimate it. And often there's going to be little stuff, you know, like let's just take this stuff for example, right? There's this stuff, it's softer than my original model, but I know that I'm going to go to print with it, so I'm not going to worry about this right this second. What I'm going to then do is come down here and I'm going to decimate this. And we're going to decimate this to 1 million polys. Well, if I want this to be very low, I can decimate it. Let's just take it to 250,000. That shouldn't take too long. There we go. So now you can see that from back here, you know, this model still retains a ton of its detail, but you know that you're going to print this like 1/6 scale, and it's sitting, so people are going to see this head a lot, right? I mean, this is what they're primarily looking at, and you've lost most of your detail, right? All of that stuff you worked on, well, you want that to be in this model. Well, we went down to 250,000 for this reason. So now we're going to come back up here. We're going to hold down Control, turn it on, turn it off, just to make sure I haven't hit any other control points. I'm going to come back down here. I'm now going to turn on the history brush, but I'm going to turn on my Sculptress Pro brush as well. And let's come in here real quick. And what this is going to do is I'm going to make this smaller. And as you can see, it's adding the geometry right here on top where I'm brushing that I need to retain some of that detail. Now I'm doing it this size first, just so I can see, you know, what's happened and where I need the geometry. And you must make sound effects. If you're not making sound effects, you're just not trying. All right. So we have that. Let's come back in here. We're going to make this a little smaller. And you can see we can get this nice, sharp, and crisp by just coming in and adding geometry where we need it. Right? And you just work through and get it where you need it. Now, the other kind of cool thing about this is, let's say we get this, and this gets up to, you know, 2 million, right? Well, you can redecimate it, and it'll take the higher detail into consideration when it's decimating, and then you can come back over it again and really just get the high point, like a few surfaces that you really want to read well. And this is the best way to retain detail and be printable or printer ready, you know. And you just come back in and fill in the details you need. And what's very cool about this is, let's say you need, excuse me. Let's say you need branding or something right here. Or this is their security thing, whatever. So you come in here. And the nice thing is you can come in. I use smooth as a let's add geometry sort of thing. With the history brush on, though, it's good here. And now we're going to zoom in a little more and just grab a different brush, make it tiny. Make it tiny. And if you really need super, super tight detail, you can come back in and add it at this point. So no matter where you need the detail, sorry. You know, you can get this very, very tiny.
That water's getting you today.
Well, my allergies kind of blew out, and so I'm a little choky as is. I'm like, and you know, so whoever says you can't get detail on ZBrush is silly. And as you notice, we're still under 1 million polys. Try to get something that detailed. You'd normally have to have your mesh totally at that level, right? And so instead of trying to do the, oh, let's mask this off and then divide it and not have your subdivision levels, just wait till the end and you can get it in here. And yeah, it just tends.
Do you do one of those on all your pieces? Put the little hidden Thomas?
No, no, not at all. It's just a really good example of how damn small you can make something. Because
it would be a fun thing to do in your pieces. Like, find the hidden Thomas. It's like the hidden Mickeys in Disney World and Disneyland.
Right. I do put all kinds of weird stuff in them, but here, let's see how big this is. I don't think this will show. I mean, that is 0.025, so
yeah, it's tiny.
Yeah, it's what? I always forget my so that's 25 microns. A micron's 1,000th.
Yeah, it's hard to read the numbers for us.
0.0257. So that's
0.02, and you're in millimeters right now, right?
yeah. So that's totally that's 250 microns, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Because hold on, let's do this.
that is tiny.
That's 40 microns. You know, so that's not going to show up because that's less than 25 microns wide.
Yeah.
That's 15 microns wide. So you can put detail in that will never ever show up. You know, so it's a really good way of coming back in and tuning your model up right before it goes out to print. Because when you decimate and when you know, are trying to get it to where it's going to go out, it usually gets a little soft. So you just come back in, put in all your little details, and go. And it's nice because let's just say we want to, man, got me.
What's the reason why you like that material? What's the reason for you wanting to sculpt in that material?
So this is the material that I found closest to replicate the detail that's going to come off my model into the printer, because a lot of the matte caps are very dramatic and it makes the shadows look very deep, or you know, someone has cavity turned very high up. And I found that this is like if I put a little line in and I can see it, then it'll look like that in my model, in my print. The natural gray, which one is it? Wrong button.
Wait, did I lose your audio?
No, I'm here, right?
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Well, sorry. And then do you ever really turn on your perspective camera since you're 3D printing pretty much everything you do?
I never use perspective. I find that perspective adds drama that won't show up in the print or that I don't find in the print. You know, I find it easier to. Also, if you get into perspective and you're trying to look at flat edges and you're trying to get things to match up really tight, often the perspective distorts how they meet. So I found that I tend to lose if I put on perspective, I trick myself sometimes. So it's better just not to have it on.
Right.
For me, you know.
No, I'm the same way when I'm 3D printing. I don't ever turn my camera on.
No, I mean, because I need
camera distortion. It's not going to look the same when you print it if you're looking at it with a distortion.
Ever. Oh, goodness gracious. But so like if you want it to kick the detail up in this eye, hold on, where's my brush? 0.5. I change my dynamic brush scale quite often because, that's the problem. Because I change scales a lot, and I don't like having my brush size change so dramatically. I like it to be a smoother transition in scale, so I change my dynamic brush scale all the time. But like if you're happy with everything, but you really want this to be detailed, I will just use smooth and add geometry, right? And then come back in with ClayTubes and not in dynamic, because dynamic tends to make things soft, and so that way you can come in, add the detail that you want. SK trim, boom, boom. You know, and you can sharpen that up pretty well. And we didn't add very much geometry to get it there, right? So you can see that sharpened that pupil up very well. and you just come back and decide what you need to be crisp, and it allows you to retain a low model count and still sharpen up a bunch of details. Yeah. I think that's, if anybody wants to go back to any of the other demos or anything, we can. But I think that pretty much covers it, maybe?
Yeah, you got through everything that you wanted to get through. Right?
Yeah.
The deformers as well, and
Yeah, I think so.
yeah,
Yeah,
you showed your deformers. You showed your history brush.
yeah. We showed draft angle.
Yep.
Did I
This
just
is a-
talk really fast?
No, where did you get the material that you're using? Is that the one you made, or are you able to share that?
No, this is Ma Dirty Blue 1. So this is on your
Library.
in the library. Michelangelo Hernandez. Ma Dirty Blue. And it's 1 because it's brighter than the other. The other one's a little dim.
Yeah, someone just shared the link for you in the chat.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry, my
So
nose
Thomas,
started
I noticed
running.
Here, I got a question for you coming through. Hello, Thomas. I noticed your ClayTubes builds up compared to the default ClayTubes that doesn't. Is there a way you can get that brush?
So
are you using ClayTubes or ClayTubes build up?
I use ClayTubes. I don't use build-up because I like to sculpt in layers. And what I mean by layers, let's get to something that has some resolution here.
So you haven't done anything to the brush though. Like ClayTubes, you're just using the default ClayTubes?
Nope, it's changed a little. So turn on lazy mouse, and I changed my lazy step to 0.003, my roll distance to 10, and my lazy smooth to 8. And then I turned lazy mouse off, and that keeps it smooth. It doesn't get that chatter, right? It gives me sharp edges. Because like on these lines, a lot of people come in and take any one of their tools and they're going to draw those lines in, and that breaks up surface continuity. So I'll very, very rarely draw a line in like that. I tend to sculpt I'll sculpt the creases in instead of cutting them in. And then I use SK twist a lot to define edges. So instead of cutting edges in, I'm sort of putting a lip around things. And that keeps the surface a little bit calmer. You do have to come in and kind of press down that back edge. But that's giving you a nice reflective edge where, because the roll is literally rolling. It's creating a surface that's doing this. It comes around and gives you a half round here, and it's sort of giving you this nice reflective edge here. And then the clay fill, I'll come back with clay fill. Get rid of that top one, hold it down Alt, and kind of knock off that edge there. And then you have something that you're not breaking the surface continuity, but you're getting nice rolled reflective edges off those turns instead of, you can see that compared to right, this flattens things out. You lose the visual reference of what's going over and under, where here your light is telling you your story as opposed to a line. And a lot of people do this, and it really flattens their sculpt out dramatically.
Okay, so a question came through. Robot Ball, can you add a little bit more to your question? You're asking about, can you talk more about sculpting versus drawing?
Yeah.
If you want to hit that right now, Thomas.
Yeah, of
that's
course.
a question coming through, but I wanted to see if there's more information.
Let's take a plane.
And then real quick as far as computer goes for using ZBrush, getting more high polygon counts, what people are saying, yes, CPU and RAM. Don't forget about your hard drive though.
Yeah, so
and that your speeds are just as important.
yeah, so I guess ZBrush actually is designed to work off of a very fast single processor. And so this machine is, to be deadly honest, I don't even know what the chip is in this. This is my portable machine. I have a machine at home that's a little more robust. It's a dual 18 core, 3.8, I think. And then that has, well, it's only 64 gigs of RAM now because I lost one of my RAMs fried. And so I had to take 2 of them out. So I'm down to 64 RAMs at home. I want a big machine. I need a lot of processing.
All right. So Robot Ball says you know what you'd be talking about with that question, the difference between.
Yeah.
So go ahead. You can take that now.
So actually, let's do this. Sorry, can't even draw straight lines. I'm a mess over here. All right, so let's take SK trim and knock this down. All right, so what a lot of people do when they're, let's just take this as a weave, right? Because that's a good over and under. And so they do what they do when they draw, right? So you're like, okay, so that one's going over, that one's going under, that one's going over, under, over, under. And so what happens is by drawing these lines, you created something that is going to reflect, one, as one surface, and two, you've lost surface continuity, right? This no longer associates with this surface because these lines are here, and I'll show you with a reflective material here in a second. So if we just do this, SK trim, smooth these out so they're actually moving. Right? So this looks much more dramatic, right? Oh, that's going to read better. Well, if we get back here, you can start to see that this really is going over and under. This is starting to, it's still, because this is a matte material, it's still kind of getting there, and you're like, oh, well, look, it looks stronger. Now let's go to this. Now when it starts to reflect, you can see that these lines are here, but all of this is reflecting sort of as one surface, where this has the hot spot, the low light, hot, low, and the light is telling the story on this one. And it's really crazy how big a difference it makes when you're dealing with small details. One sec, let me see if I have come on. Sorry. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Whoa, everybody calm down. Now, you can't really. So these are very, very flat. Really, these are not big steps, but you can see that it's reflecting even in here. See how you can see like the little brush strokes in the eyeball here, and using the lines to make it dark, but these are very, very tiny steps, but they reflect very much like layers. I wish I had a good picture of the back of this ring, because this really shows it. Like, yeah, it doesn't do it any good. Sorry, this ring was really designed to show this point, but don't have it. So the other demo I do with this that's kind of old, but it gets the point across, is if you are drawing a pocket, Right here, let's just do this one. Come on. I could just go back, can't I? There we go. Okay. So if you're drawing a rectangle with a rectangle with a rectangle, or and this is why I like ClayTubes, because it sort of functions as a layer brush, right? So each layer I put on, it sort of sticks with a layer. And as they start to reflect in different directions here, let's do this. I think that's probably a better way.
Is this a material you got from the library as well?
Yeah.
Or is
This is just a standard gold that I got from
the standard gold that ships?
Yeah. So let's look at it this way. If we go back here and look at these, let me get rid of this one real quick just so we're not. I'll show you that in a sec. So you can see that obviously the lines show up better here. And we've made these huge steps, right? But it looks very, very flat. And then this one has different tones, right? So this is lighter, this is darker, this is less dark. Now the second we roll this, look at how dynamic this surface is, right? Dark, bright, tan, where this is reflecting the same direction as this base angle. So is this. So when it gets to here, right? This is all one color. This is, or one tone. It's all one tone. This is all one tone. And this has huge, deep steps, right? But this one is multiple, it's reflecting at multiple angles. So you're getting a lot more surface activity out of this. So even when we go way back here, do you see how you're getting tone values out of that you're not out of the other? I mean, look at that right there. You know, that's a bright spot. And so on jewelry or anything coming out of, like out to print or out of the machine into the physical world, multiple kinetic or dynamic surfaces create complex reflection patterns, right? And so if you have that, right? And actually, let's do this with a thinner. My brush is just too big. It needs to be a little smaller than that. That has lines. Are no lines in this one. Let's oh, that's pretty high. I'm like, why is that being so melodramatic for me? And then you put a button on it. You can see that that has a lot more surface interest than this does, right? And then if you just come back in and quickly just roll these edges, right? See how it bites those bright edges? And this is just one object. This is a dimensional object, and that's flat. You know, there's not a lot of dimension there, but just having complex surfaces that are reflecting differently is a real important thing. And so like in scroll work and stuff, you see a lot of people who are sort of just making this sort of half round kind of thing going on. But if you just take one side and you turn it into a scoop, as opposed to everything being half round, what you now have are, you know, dynamic surfaces that are going to reflect differently. And they give you like a bunch of travel, right? You can see the light traveling along that edge right there, as opposed to just a half round. And that allows you to get very dynamic reflections from a bunch of different directions. Here, right?
Nice.
Let's see. Boom. You can see the shadow run on those, right? And so it just allows reflectivity. So when you're making something, think of the reflective properties that it's going to have when it comes out of the machine. And I can only assume that if you're doing it like game assets and stuff, that if you're not using, you know, baked in materials, that it works there too. I don't know.
Do you have an email address that you're willing to share? So if someone wanted to email you or a way to contact you, what's the best way?
Yeah. TOMAS, Tomas, MUL at Gmail is probably the easiest way.
Here, I'll put it. TOMASMUL at Gmail, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat. Everyone has it too.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with them.
No, of course. And I stream every Monday night, so you can always ask questions then.
That's loosely every like you stream through the night into the day.
I do long streams.
People we're making jokes, but sometimes he streams for 8 hours straight, 6 hours straight. So
easy, yeah.
He starts at 10 o'clock at night and goes to like 4 in the morning or like 6 in the morning.
We start at 8 and go till 2 to 3 usually.
Yeah.
I'm getting all those people who don't really get the live, so I'm giving everyone an opportunity to touch the live.
Right. At some point, people can chime in with you.
Right? Yeah, you know. Yeah.
All right. I think that's it. Does any other questions from anybody else before we call this a done stream? So again, this is beginning of season 3 already for our ZBrush Masters. Thomas is kicking the season off.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's.
We do these every Tuesday with an amazing ZBrush artist. Again, you can find out more information about that on our schedules. Here, I'll put that in the calendar really quick right now so you all can have that while we're all chatting together. Let me get the link for you all. I'm going to put it in calendar mode for you. But I got to remember I'm on a Windows machine again right now. Hold on, there's a question coming through. So you can click on this calendar here and you'll be able to go to, again, any of the days that are streaming. So Daniel Danko Angelozzi is next week's ZBrush Masters. He's pretty, another amazing artist, does a lot of stuff.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah. There was a question coming through, hold on, from My Kiss. Hold on, let me find your question, My Kiss. Oh, My Kiss is asking if he could be a mod for your streams that you do.
Of course.
Are you streaming only? Are you streaming only on with our channel, or are you streaming? You have your own channel as well that you're streaming.
Well, I have my own channel, but I haven't been streaming on it because, well, I was running that class, and that was 3 days a week. But I'm going to start streaming on TS Wittelsbach at Twitch. TS Wittelsbach.
Okay.
soon.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is in order to make my kiss a mod on your streams, if it's during the stream that you're doing through our channel, we would have to do it.
Oh yeah. Oh, good
because
point.
it's our account.
Right.
So, my kiss, are you referring to the ones he does Mondays on the ZBrush Pixologic streams? Okay. Mike, yes, I'm gonna send you my email address, and then that way I'll pass you along. I don't know what we're doing for mod people on our channel, honestly, so that's someone else running that department. So you can email me, and then I'll pass your information along, what you want to do.
Right on, right on.
Hold on, I'm just making sure I didn't miss a question that came through.
Okay.
Will you be doing another portfolio review soon before the end of the month?
Well, last night was the portfolio review. We can just do it as the first Monday this month. I'll do it next week. We didn't, just so I wasn't streaming until 3 in the morning and then trying to do this. I didn't stream last night just so I had some brain space. But we'll do crits next Monday. I was blown away. Last month, I didn't get through all the crits in 8.5 hours, and then the next Monday it was 6 hours. So a lot of crits.
Oh yeah, man, critiques can take a while.
Yeah.
It eats up time before you know it. You're hours into critiquing.
Oh, and you know me, I crit for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours.
I'm the same way. I gotta teach myself to be quiet and just move on with things too. Okay, well, Thomas, thank you so much for doing this and doing one of our ZBrush Masters and kicking off our season 3. It's been a pleasure seeing you again, and
Indeed.
The topic was great too, something very different. And I think as you and I talked to, showing people there's other things also out there in the world to make a living. Not everything is film and game. I would have to say you might even have more fun sometimes.
I think so.
Like, you work on different IPs all the time. Like, if you're making toys, you'll be doing Marvel one week, then you'll be doing something DC another week. Maybe you could be doing whatever another week. It's all over the place. So,
well, the beauty is if you just sit down and, I mean, because as much time as a lot of you put in to get good at what you're doing, if you just refocus a little, and you can be doing all of that, but then make, some miniatures or make some little toys or make something where you can actually start to monetize your skills. And that's where the printing revolution is a beautiful thing, and there are beginning to be some small manufacturers for sure.
Yeah, the world we live in now, the ability for us to just make something really quick in ZBrush and then print it out and physically make it, and then
is awesome.
Mold, it's amazing. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and there's some resins that are coming out that are robust enough that if you drop them, they don't just shatter and blow up. There's a lot of resin technology happening right now, and no, it's pretty darn exciting, actually.
Yeah, snapping. I make snap joints all the time in ZBrush, and you can print them out ready to go. Everything. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
It is. Buy a printer. They're awesome.
All right, well, I'll let you get on with your day, everyone. Thank you, and you can definitely check out more of Thomas's streams. I shared. Let me share it again. I shared information about Thomas on our page as well, showing also when he streams and his past streams that he's done on the ZBrush channel. We have actually a presenters page for each one of our streamers, presenters.
And that has ArtStation, Instagram, and that stuff in it. Little page does. So that's a lot of the contact information as well.
Yeah, it's got everyone's contact, so you guys can also see other streamers in this link I just provided right now. I used Robot Ball's comments just to add to it really easy. So you guys can also go there and you get his information there and examples and past streams as well.
Yay, team.
All right.
All righty. Thank you very much for having me. It's always a joy.
Yes. Thank you again, Thomas.
Indeed.
And I'll let you have the final say sound off because you also have to stop the stream.
Oh, I guess that's a good point. Thanks a lot for having me, and it was great for you guys to hang out, and hopefully you gained something out of it. And I'm always there on Saturday or Mondays. If anyone needs anything, just yell. And thank you everyone at ZBrush for making ZBrush and, keeping the community good. We have a wonderful community. All right. Here we go.